It started with a piece of paper and a knock on the door. Not a warrant, not a delivery, just a bright orange violation slip-taped to the front door of Sergeant Tom Rodriguez's suburban home, fluttering in the warm breeze like a warning flag. The paper looked harmless, almost comical at first, but when Tom read the bold lettering, non-compliance, unauthorized structure, wheelchair ramp, his stomach twisted. That ramp had been installed 6 months ago after his daughter Emma's spinal injury. It wasn't just a wooden slope, it was her independence, her freedom to roll down into the driveway, feel the sun on her face, and pretend the world was still a good place. Tom crumpled the notice in his calloused hand, feeling a heat rise behind his eyes that wasn't from the summer sun. His badge was still clipped to his belt from the early shift. 100 violent arrests, 1,000 threats from criminals, and somehow this little piece of HOA nonsense was what made his blood boil. He glanced over at Emma in the driveway, carefully guiding her service dog Daisy through a stay command. She was smiling. She hadn't seen the notice. Tom didn't want her to. Not yet. The next morning, the doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. A woman in designer, sunglasses, pencil skirt, and a blouse too stiff to be comfortable stood on the porch with a manila folder and a practiced smile. Karen Bellamy, OA President, she said, as if that title gave her the authority of a Supreme Court judge. She looked past Tom, scanning the yard like she was surveying a battlefield. Just following up on your ramp, I hope you're aware it violates community, uniformity standards. Tom raised an eyebrow. My daughter can't walk, he said flatly. Karen didn't blink. There are aesthetic alternatives you could have considered. We emailed everyone the new guidelines last quarter. Section 4C, paragraph 3. Her tone was syrupy, condescending, calculated. Tom asked if she'd like to discuss the matter like adults. She declined, citing formal channels. He thought it would stop there. It didn't. 2 days later, another violation. This time, excessive noise, uncontrolled animal. It was Daisy, Emma's golden Labrador, who was trained to respond to seizures, pick up fallen items, even alert emergency services if Emma collapsed. Tom knew her bark soft, occasional, never hostile. But Karen didn't care. She didn't see Daisy as a lifeline. She saw her as a nuisance, a blot on her perfect lawnscape fantasy. Then came the third notice. Unapproved vehicle, oversized, non-standard paint. Tom's van, specially modified for Emma's wheelchair lift, apparently violated the HOA's visual harmony policy. Karen seemed to be working off a list only she could see, and she was checking it off with ruthless joy. When Tom asked if he could speak at the next HOA meeting, Karen told him the agenda was full. When he showed up anyway, she accidentally skipped over him. But what made it worse wasn't the rule set, was the way she smiled when she served them. The way her eyes sparkled, not with righteousness, but with satisfaction. Neighbors whispered that Karen had moved in just 6 months ago after leaving a gated community in Colorado under mysterious circumstances. Nobody asked questions. The HOA board had been mostly inactive until she showed up, waving bylaws like holy scripture. Within weeks, flower pots were removed. Welcome. Mats disappeared. Flags came down. Kids stopped skateboarding. It was like watching a neighborhood suffocate slowly, politely, under layers of bureaucracy and forced civility. But Tom wasn't like the others. He'd spent 20 years in law enforcement, learning to spot patterns. And Karen's pattern was clear. She went after the weak, the different, the ones who wouldn't fight back. But she had made a miscalculation. Because this time, her target had a father who knew the law better than she did, who wore the same uniform as the men she liked to manipulate, and who had spent his entire career standing between predators and the people they thought they could break. Karen thought she could chip away at the Rodriguez family with fine print and fake authority. She had no idea she was about to start a war. It wasn't long before Tom realized his family wasn't the only one under siege. At first, he thought the HOA notices were just Karen's way of picking a petty fight with the new guy on the block. But then he started hearing stories. First came Dave, a retired Marine who lived 2 houses down and had flown his American flag every day since his son enlisted. Dave got a violation for unauthorized pole height and excessive fabric display. The flagpole hadn't moved in 10 years, but the ink on that violation notice was still drying when Karen smugly reminded Dave at the mailbox that not all displays of nationalism are welcome in shared spaces. He'd nearly lost it. Then there was Mrs. Green, the 84-year-old widow who kept a row of garden gnomes lining her walkway, each one hand painted by her late husband, gone 3 years now. Karen fined her $150 for unapproved decorative figures, and when Mrs. Plants Tring Livor, Green pleaded for leniency, Karen told her the HOA's aesthetic policy wasn't sentimental. It didn't stop there. Teenage Jaden, who spent his afternoons skateboarding along the cul-de-sac to blow off steam from school, got slapped with a warning for reckless behavior. His board was confiscated by a private security firm Karen had hired for enforcement. A private security firm, in a suburban neighborhood, paid for with HOA dues. What tied it all together wasn't just the cruelty, it was the precision. Karen didn't go after people with power. She didn't bother the investment banker in the blue Colonial or the real estate agent with the new Tesla. No, she aimed lower, for those who couldn't fight back easily. The elderly, the disabled, teenagers, veterans, single parents. Every week, a new rule showed up in mailboxes, accompanied by a smiling newsletter and a pastel-colored reminder that community harmony starts with compliance. But compliance meant surrendering identity. Tom saw the shift. Kids no longer rode bikes past dusk. Lawns started to look eerily similar. People waved less, looked down more. Conversations moved indoors. What had once been a friendly neighborhood was becoming a Stepford village. But Karen had misread something fundamental. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a community, and people were starting to notice. Quiet alliances formed over back fences and whispered check-ins. Mrs. Green baked cookies for Jaden's mom, who had just received her own violation for visible garbage bins. Dave started walking with Daisy and Emma during their morning strolls, pretending it was just for exercise. But Tom knew better. He was watching out for them. The resistance was quiet, but it was growing. Then came the escalation. Tom had expected more notices, more fines. What he didn't expect was for Karen to start weaponizing authority. One afternoon, Tom came home from a shift to find his van photographed and tagged, literally tagged, with a sticker reading, "Removal pending." When he peeled it off, there was another notice. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Legal action for a van designed to transport a wheelchair. That's when Tom knew she wasn't just following rules, she was creating them. And she was doing it faster than the community could respond. He attended another HOA meeting, this time with documentation, printouts of ADA regulations, and a prepared speech. But Karen never let him speak. She cut the meeting short, citing emotional disruption. Later, he learned that she'd told the board he had a tendency toward aggression and was intimidating residents. The manipulation was brazen. But she wasn't done. The next notice was the one that broke something in him. Your daughter's medical ramp violates the visual character of the street and must be removed or altered within 48 hours. There was no offer of a hearing, no mention of ADA exceptions, just a threat. A quiet, smiling threat designed to provoke fear without recourse. Tom sat on the couch that night with Emma asleep beside him and Daisy curled at her feet. He stared at the paper for over an hour, until the words burned behind his eyes. It wasn't just a violation anymore. It was a declaration. Karen Bellamy wasn't going to stop not until she pushed them out, broke them, or forced them to give up. But she hadn't counted on who she was dealing with. Tom was a man who had talked armed suspects down from suicide, who had walked through gunfire to pull civilians out of danger, who had spent his entire adult life facing evil and never once backed down. And now, the battle had come to his doorstep. Karen had gone from manipulator to predator, and predators don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when someone stands up and makes them. Tom wasn't going to wait for the next violation. He was going to push back, not with fists, not even with the badge, but with something far more powerful: truth, community, and a refusal to let fear win. Karen had declared war. She just didn't realize she'd picked a fight with the wrong man. The sun was high, and the air had that perfect weekend stillness, no rush, no noise, just the distant hum of a lawnmower and the sound of Emma laughing as Daisy tried to catch bubbles floating out of her wheelchair-mounted bubble wand. Tom had the grill warming up, the neighborhood finally showing signs of life again after weeks of tension. He'd started to believe things were settling, that maybe the wave of violations and passive-aggressive threats had finally crested. But peace has a funny way of disguising a storm, especially when the storm is calculated and wearing a smile. The black SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac without warning. No lights, no sirens, but it screamed authority from the moment it pulled up. It had no department insignia, just a small canine unit decal on the side, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Tom didn't recognize the vehicle, but something about it made him stand up from the grill immediately. He started walking toward the driveway when the door opened, and a man, in a security-style uniform, stepped out, canine patch clearly visible on his right shoulder, leash in hand, and beside him, a towering German shepherd, eyes locked and tail rigid. The man didn't look like a police officer. His posture was all wrong, his uniform too clean, his face too smug. "Who authorized this visit?" Tom asked, immediately switching into officer mode. The man didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a clipboard from under his arm and held it up. "We've received multiple complaints about an aggressive animal on your property. The HOA has requested inspection under Public Safety Code 413. It was a code Tom knew didn't exist. Before he could reply, Karen walked around the side of the SUV as if she were strolling through a garden, her heels clicking on the pavement, her sunglasses perched perfectly. "Just ensuring the safety of our residents," she said sweetly, barely glancing at Tom before her eyes landed on Emma, who was now paused mid-laugh, bubbles still floating past her face. Daisy stood alert by her side. "This is private property," Tom said, stepping between Karen and his daughter. "If there's an issue, it goes through the sheriff's office or animal control, not an HOA call-in with a fake security unit." The man with the leash gave Karen a nod, and that's when everything unraveled. "Go," Karen said, her voice calm but unmistakably clear. The man loosened his grip on the leash just slightly. The German shepherd, muscles coiled like a spring, surged forward. Time slowed as the dog launched across the yard, aimed directly at Emma. Her wheelchair rocked backward from the force of the movement as Daisy barked in warning and stepped in front of her, but she was too small. The shepherd struck with terrifying precision, knocking Emma sideways out of her chair, her body slamming into the concrete with a sickening thud. Blood spattered across the sidewalk as her forehead caught the edge of the ramp. Daisy lunged, grabbing the bigger dog by the shoulder, teeth bared in pure instinct to protect her girl. The two dogs tumbled in a mess of fur, snarls, and blood, paws scrambling across concrete. Tom was already sprinting, his legs moving before his brain could catch up. He hit the dog handler in the chest and sent him sprawling, grabbing for the shepherd's harness to rip him off his daughter. The dog resisted, but Tom's grip was vice-like, born of fear and fury. Daisy whimpered, her back leg bleeding, but she didn't stop protecting Emma, nudging her with her nose, licking her face to keep her awake. "Emma, baby, stay with me," Tom choked, seeing the blood on her temple, the tears in her eyes, the way she clutched her twisted wrist, crying but trying to be brave. Her voice was faint but clear. "Is Daisy okay? Daddy, is she okay?" Tom turned slowly, eyes locking onto Karen, who stood just out of reach with her arms crossed, and a soft, satisfied smile playing on her lips like she'd finally proven a point. That look broke something inside him. 20 years on the force had taught him control, patience, restraint in the worst situations imaginable. But this wasn't a suspect resisting arrest. This wasn't a domestic call gone sideways. This was a calculated attack on his daughter, on a child, on someone who couldn't even stand up to defend herself. And it was all because of Karen. "You tried to kill her," Tom said, voice low and dangerous as he stood up, blood on his uniform, fists clenched. Karen's smirk faltered for a split second, but she covered it quickly. "Don't be dramatic. I was protecting the neighborhood from a dangerous animal." She motioned toward Daisy, who was limping toward Emma with bloody fur and the leash dragging behind her. Tom took a step forward, and this time Karen's eyes widened. "You made a mistake," he said. "A career-ending, prison sentence-level mistake." Sirens blared in the distance, drawing closer. Neighbors were starting to gather, phones out, faces pale with horror. Jim Walker, the retired vet, came sprinting across the street with his phone still pressed to his ear. "Ambulance is on the way, and so are real cops, not this rent-a-badge," he shouted. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the momentum was gone. Her authority evaporated in the face of blood and witnesses. She turned to the handler. Say something. Tell them it was procedure. But he was already backing away, stammering about, just following instructions. Hands raised like that would shield him from what was coming. Tom didn't even bother replying. Instead, he knelt beside Emma again, brushing the hair gently away from her face, whispering, "You're safe now. I promise you, sweetheart. She'll never touch you again." By the time the police cars pulled up, the cul-de-sac looked like a crime scene. Emma was being lifted into the ambulance with Daisy curled protectively at her side, refusing to be separated. The responding officers had barely stepped out of their cruisers when Tom held up his badge. "Sergeant Tom Rodriguez. I want a full report, every name, every statement. And I want her," he pointed directly at Karen, "held for questioning. I have probable cause, multiple eyewitnesses, and a child bleeding on the sidewalk." The officers nodded. One of them, Officer Riley, recognized him and gave a grim nod. "We've got it, Sarge. We'll handle it right." Karen's voice was shrill now, no longer cool and composed. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I have rights." But no one was listening. Not anymore. Whatever power she thought she had had just bled out onto the pavement along with Emma's innocence. The game was over. Tom wasn't just a homeowner anymore. He was a father on a mission, a police officer with authority, and a man who had just watched someone try to destroy the one thing he loved most in the world. And that made him the most dangerous person Karen Bellamy had ever crossed. The emergency room was quiet, except for the occasional beep of monitors and the low murmur of nurses behind the glass. Tom sat beside Emma's bed, his police uniform stained with bloodsome hers, some Daisy's. She was asleep now, finally resting after a flurry of tests and x-rays and whispered consultations. Concussion, dislocated shoulder, fractured ribs. A long recovery ahead, but the doctors had called it lucky. Lucky. If a massive dog attacking a disabled teenager in her own driveway was considered lucky, Tom hated to imagine what the alternative would have looked like. Down the hall, Daisy was undergoing emergency surgery at the vet clinic next door. 3 deep puncture wounds, possible nerve damage, the kind of injuries that could end a service dog's career or her life. And still, she had saved Emma. She had done what she was trained to do: protect, defend, love without question. Back at the police station, Tom's partner, Detective Lisa Mendez, was already laying the groundwork for a case that would make headlines. She'd watched the video recorded by Emma's friend, and her face had gone stone cold. "We're going after them, Tom," she said. "All of them." This was premeditated. She wasn't just talking about the fake officer who released the dog. She was talking about Karen Bellamy and the thin thread of fake power she had used to manipulate, threaten, and terrorize an entire neighborhood. Lisa dug into Karen's past like a surgeon, peeling back layers of smiling newsletters and tidy HOA documents to reveal the rot underneath. Phoenix, Denver, Tampa. In each place, the pattern was the same: rise to leadership, implement extreme policies, use loopholes and fake regulations to isolate residents, skim HOA funds, push people out of their homes, then vanish before legal action could catch up. But she'd stayed too long this time. And this time, she had gone too far. Tom called in every favor he'd ever earned. He reached out to David Kim, a civil rights attorney he'd worked with on ADA compliance training years ago. David didn't hesitate. "You've got more than a lawsuit," he said after watching the video. "You've got a federal case. This was a hate crime, plain and simple. Assault on a disabled minor, abuse of authority, civil rights violations, emotional trauma. We'll bury her in court, and when we're done, she'll lose everything." It wasn't revenge Tom was after. It was accountability, consequences. A clear message that people like Karen Bellamy could no longer use rules as weapons, that not every community would bow to fear. Word of the attack spread faster than Tom could keep up with. The neighborhood group chat exploded. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact were suddenly knocking on Tom's door with casseroles, letters, support. They were angry not just about what happened to Emma, but about everything Karen had done. The fines, the threats, the silence she had imposed through intimidation. People were ready to fight back. So Tom did what any good officer would do: built a case. He organized statements, compiled testimonies, gathered receipts, every false violation, every recorded interaction, every quietly sobbed story from neighbors who thought they were alone. And when the next HOA meeting came, Tom made sure it was the most attended in community history. The community center overflowed. Standing room only. Jim Walker brought his entire extended family. Mrs. Green sat front row in her wheelchair, her gnomes tucked in a tote bag at her feet, like totems of resistance. Jaden wore a shirt that read, "Skate and survive." Emma, still bruised and sore, insisted on being there, flanked by her doctors, her friends, and Daisy wrapped in a vest and bandages but sitting proudly at her side. Karen walked in with her head held high, flanked by her allies Janet from the Bylaws Committee and Robert, her perpetually silent husband. She looked around as if she expected applause. Instead, she was met with a sea of silent, angry faces. Tom stepped to the front without needing to be introduced. His uniform carried more weight than Karen's title ever had. "I call for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president," he said. Karen banged the gavel hard, trying to interrupt. "This is not on the agenda." "Actually," Tom replied, pulling out a binder, "Article 7 of the HOA bylaws allows for removal of officers in cases of misconduct. And I'd say ordering a dog to attack a disabled child qualifies." Murmurs turned to gasps as he connected his laptop to the projector. "Let's go to the tape." The video played in full. No cuts, no commentary. Just the raw, horrifying footage of Karen giving the order, the dog attacking, Emma falling, Daisy bleeding. There were sobs in the room. Some covered their mouths. Others just shook their heads in disbelief. When it ended, Tom wasn't finished. He clicked through pages of documentation photos of families Karen had harassed in Phoenix, screenshots of complaints in Denver, scanned letters from victims who couldn't be here but wanted their voices heard. "She didn't just make life difficult," Tom said. "She destroyed lives. She used rules as weapons and power as a shield, but not anymore." Mrs. Green stood up. Her voice was trembling but clear. "I move to remove Karen Bellamy as president, effective immediately." "Seconded," Jim Walker boomed. "Thirded," Maria Santos shouted. The vote wasn't close. Not even Karen's allies dared raise their hands for her. It was unanimous. Karen tried to speak, but no one listened. The voices of the community drowned her out as she stormed from the building, threatening lawsuits no one took seriously. She was done. Her power stripped. Her illusion shattered. What followed was swift and merciless. Formal charges, a federal investigation. Karen was arrested for multiple counts of assault with a deadly weapon, inciting violence, disability, discrimination, animal cruelty, and fraud. The man who released the dog was charged and revealed to be an unlicensed contractor Karen had paid under the table. Her financial records showed she had been skimming HOA fees for years. Court dates were scheduled. News vans parked on the block for weeks, and when the trial finally came, the jury didn't take long. Karen was found guilty on all counts. 3 years in prison, 2 years probation, banned from HOA leadership for life. Her house was seized to pay damages. She lost everything. 6 months later, Tom stood on the front porch, watching Emma and Daisy playing in the yard. The ramp had been repainted. The flowers were brighter than ever. Kids rode their bikes past, waving. Neighbors smiled, lingered, laughed again. The community had changed, not just because Karen was gone, but because they had taken back their voice, because they had refused to be bullied into silence. A letter arrived that morning, handwritten, shaky, from prison. Karen, apologizing, asking for forgiveness. Tom read it once, then fed it to the shredder. Some things didn't need to be saved. What mattered was that Emma was healing, that Daisy had survived, that the house was safe, that peace wasn't just possible, it was reclaimed. And for the first time in a long time, Tom felt what had been missing since the first orange violation notice appeared on his door. Not just relief, not just justice, but hope. The kind of hope you feel when a community stands tall together and says, "Enough." The kind that tells you no matter how dark it gets, good people will always rise.